The South China Sea did not merely separate the lands of Asia, it breathed with them. It was a living, restless creature, one that murmured in the mornings, roared in the summer typhoons, and glittered with silent menace beneath the moon. In the late 18th century, this sea was the artery of a vast, uneasy world. Junk-rigged merchant ships moved like flocks of migrating birds. Opium sloops crept through the mists like ghosts. Storm-worn fishing boats clung to the edges of muddy deltas where men fought tides and hunger in equal measure. At its heart stood Canton, Guangzhou, the only legal gateway between the Qing Empire and the foreign kingdoms hungry for tea, porcelain, and silk. The port was a symphony of contradictions, gilded merchant mansions rising above alleys thick with poverty, imperial officials who preached order while pocketing bribes, Tanka boatwomen bargaining with European sailors who stared at them with a mixture of desire and superstition. Silver flowed in, secrets flowed out, and danger clung to every salt-soaked plank of the Pearl River Delta. It was in this world, half magnificent, half monstrous, that a child named Shi Young first opened her eyes. Her earliest memories were not of houses or courtyards, but of water. Water beneath her feet, water dripping from the sky, water slapping against the wooden ribs of the sampan her family called home. She was Tanka, born among a people who lived their entire lives afloat. To the land-bound Han, the Tanka were outcasts, untouchable, uneducated, unworthy of official life. But the river knew no caste, and the sea bowed to no emperor. For the Tanka, survival was both birthright and burden. Shi Young learned to swim before she could fully walk. By age 4, she could tie a fisherman's knot. By 6, she could read the water for signs of shoals and hidden currents. Her world was the river's crowded labyrinth, channels that snaked between oyster beds, inlets where smugglers whispered deals in shadowed coves, and floating hamlets where families like hers lived, worked, argued, and prayed under sagging sails. Danger was constant. Imperial patrol boats prowled the delta, searching for tax evaders or conscripts to drag away. Storms brewed without warning, smashing entire villages into silence. And always, always, there were the pirates. Sometimes they emerged from the horizon with black sails and terrible songs. Sometimes they came quietly at night, slipping alongside a fishing boat and taking whatever they wished. Shi Young saw bodies floating more often than she saw sunsets. But the greatest danger was hunger. When the fish did not come, deaths grew like mold in the damp air. A bad season could ruin a family. A single misstep, a broken mast, a lost net could decide whether a daughter remained of home or was sold to pay what could not be repaid. Shi Young was 9 when misfortune came for them. A storm tore through the delta with the rage of 1,000 drums. The sampan cracked against the rocks like a bird's fragile ribcage. Her parents bailed water with frantic hands, but the river had already chosen its prey. By dawn, Shi Young and her father clung to a shattered plank. Her mother was nowhere to be seen. Her father wept once, only once, before his face hardened like dried mud. He needed silver. Their boat was gone. So was their livelihood. And in the river world, grief was a luxury poorer than poverty. Shi Young never forgot the moment she was sold. It was not violent. There was no struggle. Her father could not meet her eyes as he signed away the last thing he had left to trade. She remembered the smell of incense, the murmur of the broker's voice, the white-knuckled grip on her wrist as she was led away.
She remembered, most vividly, the crushing realization that the river which had nurtured her had now devoured her future. The floating brothel she entered was no glittering pleasure barge of legend. The outside was painted red, but inside everything was dim and cramped, heavy with sweat, wine, and whispered transactions. Girls slept two to a cot. Windows were barred to prevent escape. The madam measured them not by age, but by value. Yet it was here, among cruelty, hunger, and the raw bargaining of lives, that something inside Qi Yang sharpened. She watched, listened, absorbed everything. The brothel was a crossroads of the sea. Chinese salt smugglers, Portuguese gun runners, Fujian merchants, corrupt minor officials, opium dealers with pockets full of foreign coins, each passed through its lantern-lit rooms. Qi Yang observed their dialects, their habits, their lies. She learned who bribed whom, which captains hated which officials, which families held grudges, which fishermen whispered rumors of pirate fleets gathering in the east. If the river had been her cradle, this underworld was her academy. By her teens, she could read a man's intentions from the twitch of his fingers. She learned to survive not by submission, but by strategy. It was said among the sailors that the Tanka courtesan in the red brothel could negotiate like a minister and remember secrets like a scholar. Customers talked to her as men often talk to women they underestimate, openly, foolishly, revealing far more than they should. Her name, Qi Yang, became known not for beauty alone, but for something far more dangerous: intelligence. It was this reputation that eventually reached the ears of a rising pirate lord. His name was Cheng I, a man who sought not just plunder, but empire. And in the smoke-thick rooms of Canton's brothels, he heard of a woman with the mind of a strategist and the knowledge of 1,000 sailors. When the day came that his emissaries boarded the floating brothel with silver and intention, Qi Yang did not tremble. She rose with quiet dignity, understanding instinctively that this was her second sail and her last. The river had devoured her once. Now she would learn to devour it back. The girl born of water was about to become the woman who ruled the sea. The South China Sea was changing. By the final years of the 18th century, the great empires of Asia had begun to creak under the weight of corruption, rebellion, and foreign ambition. But on the water, beyond the reach of decrees written in Beijing, another world was being born. The sea had always nurtured outlaws, fishermen, smugglers, and wanderers, but now it was becoming something far more dangerous, a crucible where men forged kingdoms out of chaos. Among these rising figures, one name was spoken with equal parts fear and admiration: Cheng I. He came from the reefs and hidden coves of Guangdong's southernmost peninsula, a region where the laws of the Qing grew thin and the influence of the pirate clans grew thick. The records of his youth were deliberately erased or obscured, as if even history feared the consequences of accurately remembering him. Some said he was born to a family of fishermen. Others claimed he came from a long lineage of sea bandits. But one thing was certain: Cheng I was not a common marauder. From a young age, he had the steel-eyed gaze of a man who saw the world not as it was, but as what it could be, if a bold enough hand reshaped it. The sea had given him a childhood of storms and hunger, but it had also taught him discipline. He grew into a man with a commander's posture, shoulders squared, voice like rolling thunder, a presence that could silence a deck with a single gesture. His early exploits became whispered legend: how he boarded a Qing patrol ship during a typhoon, how he turned a mutiny into an opportunity and took command of a whole flotilla in a single night, how he negotiated truces with smuggling clans that had warred for generations. But Cheng I's brilliance was not born solely of violence, it was born of vision. Across the Gulf of Tonkin, Vietnam was burning. The Tay Son brothers had risen against the oppressive Nguyen lords, throwing the region into 3 decades of brutal war. Amidst this chaos, the Vietnamese factions hired Chinese pirate fleets as mercenaries. They needed mariners who could strike fast, disappear faster, and knew the coast like the lines on their palms.
Cheng I seized the opportunity. War meant pay. War meant ships. War meant legitimacy. Under Tay Son patronage, he trained his men not merely as raiders, but as naval soldiers, disciplined, coordinated, deadly. They learned formation sailing, coordinated cannon fire, amphibious assaults. They were rewarded with gold, guns, and safe harbors free from Qing harassment. When the rebellion ended and the victors no longer needed their maritime allies, thousands of Chinese sailors were suddenly cast adrift, armed, experienced, and furious. They had tasted the wealth of war. The narrow fish haunts of Guangdong could never satisfy them again. They returned north, hungry and leaderless. Before Cheng I, the pirates of South China were fragmented, families and clans that fought each other as often as they fought the state. A strong captain could control a dozen ships, a great one perhaps 50. But Cheng I believed something radical. Piracy could be an empire. To forge it, he began uniting the major factions, a task many thought impossible. Pirate captains were notoriously proud, territorial, and quick to violence. But Cheng I used every tool at his disposal: marriages, threats, negotiations, bribes, and when necessary, swift assassinations executed so cleanly no one could trace the blade. He was not building a gang, he was building a federation.
The alliances coalesced into a structured hierarchy known as the Flag Fleets, each identified by color. Red Flag Fleet, commanded by Cheng I himself. Black Flag Fleet, led by the formidable O Po Tay. White Flag Fleet, sharp and cunning. Blue and Yellow Fleets, smaller but fiercely loyal. This confederation was not bound by tradition, but by shared profit, mutual protection, and Cheng I's iron authority. He created agreements regulating plunder distribution, strategy coordination, and territorial boundaries. He organized councils where captains argued, threatened, and bargained, but ultimately remained under the umbrella of his leadership. No pirate in living memory had achieved such unity. With each passing year, the confederation grew more formidable. Hundreds of ships, tens of thousands of men. They were the sea's shadow government. Yet Cheng I knew the alliance was fragile. It relied too heavily on one thing: himself. To secure the empire he envisioned, he needed someone who could anchor the political web he had spun, a partner whose mind was as sharp as his sword. Despite his ruthlessness, Cheng I was not blind to the limitations of brute force. Battles won fleets, alliances won kingdoms. He had mastered the former, but the latter required subtler tools: persuasion, intelligence, manipulation. When he heard the sailors of Canton whisper about a Tonka courtesan who knew everything happening on the waterfront, who the merchants secretly funded, which officials took bribes, which fishing clans held debts, which rival captains harbored discontent, he paid attention. At first, he dismissed it as drunken rumor, but the stories persisted. Of a woman whose ear was sharper than any spy, who could recall a dozen conversations from a single night, who had survived the underworld not with beauty alone, but with uncanny insight. A woman who had connections to the very community that formed the backbone of his fleet, the Tonka boat people. Intrigued, Cheng I sent discreet inquiries. The responses surprised him. Men spoke of her with a tone of wary respect. Some even used the same word they used for him, dangerous. He decided to see her for himself. It was night when Cheng I boarded the floating brothel. Lanterns cast wavering shadows across lacquered wood. Perfume mingled with the scent of salt water and spilled rice wine. The madam greeted him with trembling hands. Pirates were not common patrons in establishments that depended on daylight trade and discreet patrons. When Shi Yang was brought before him, she did not bow. She stood with calm poise, her expression unreadable. Her eyes, steady, dark, observant, met his without fear. Cheng I studied her. Shi Yang studied him back. He spoke first. "I hear you know the Delta better than most captains." Her reply was soft but unwavering. "I know the truth men try to hide. The sea shows everything if you know where to look." Cheng I smiled, an expression many feared because it heralded decisions that changed lives. "You listen well." "I listen better than most men speak." He laughed then, a low, genuine sound. She was not intimidated. She was not awed. She was useful. They spoke of currents, rumors, politics. She described the shifting alliances among boat clans, the bribes secretly flowing to officials, the whispers of mutinous captains in rival fleets. She spoke not as a frightened woman, but as an analyst. When she finished, Cheng I made his offer, not as a lover, but as a strategist. "Come with me," he said, "not as a decoration, as an ally." The madam protested. Cheng I did not hear her. Silver exchanged hands. Within an hour, Shi Yang left the brothel forever, stepping into a world where her survival would depend not on submission, but on partnership. From the moment she set foot on his flagship, her role was clear. Cheng I did not treat her like a concubine. He treated her like a counselor. She attended strategy councils. She examined tribute ledgers. She assessed captains' loyalty with uncanny accuracy. She pointed out opportunities for expansion that even he had missed. When they married in 1801, it was not merely a union of man and woman. It was a merger of two extraordinary minds. Cheng I brought military genius and ruthless ambition. Shi Yang brought political insight, intelligence networks, and a keen understanding of human nature. Together, they became the architects of a maritime empire so vast that even the Qing Dynasty dared not speak of it without fear. The Red Flag Confederation reached its zenith in the final years of Cheng I's life. What neither he nor Shi Yang knew was that the next storm would plunge the sea into chaos and force her to become not merely a strategist, but a ruler. The world had not yet met the Pirate Queen. The marriage between Cheng I and Shi Yang was not celebrated with fireworks, drunken revelry, or brazen declarations of love. It was quiet, almost businesslike. Two formidable minds binding themselves to a single audacious purpose. To the outside world, she became Cheng I Sao, the wife of Cheng I. But inside the Red Flag Fleet, she became something far more unusual. The woman who sat beside the pirate lord, not behind him. From the moment she boarded the flagship permanently, everything changed. The first time she walked across its deck, hundreds of hardened pirates, scars on their faces, knives at their belts, suspicion in their eyes, fell silent. They were men who feared storms, cannon fire, naval commands, and the wrath of their captains. But a woman at the heart of command, that unnerved them. Yet she did not lower her head. She inspected the deck with the precise, evaluating gaze of someone who judged structures, not men. She asked questions about ration systems, ammunition counts, patrol rotations, intelligence relays. Her tone was calm, authoritative, and unmistakably curious. Some laughed behind her back. Some feared her, but all noticed her. And soon, all understood that Cheng I listened when she spoke. Cheng I was a brilliant military commander. He could read wind like a prophet, judge currents by scent, and maneuver ships with the finesse of a calligrapher drawing strokes in air. But he was not an administrator. The empire he envisioned, an empire of sea wolves, required more than bold raids and victories. It required stability, order, and systems. That was where Cheng I Sao stepped in. Her first contribution was deceptively simple: information. Sitting at a low table in the captain's cabin, she organized the stream of gossip and data she harvested from the Tonka fishermen, the Canton underworld, the smuggling families, and the corrupt merchants who sailed through the delta. She turned hearsay into intelligence. She built maps marked with debts, loyalties, and grudges, maps more valuable than any naval chart. "Your captains speak of wind and weapons," she told Cheng I once, tapping a scroll. "But this is the tide that moves their hearts." He watched her, astonished and intrigued. "You read men as if they were ledgers." "I read them as if they are storms," she corrected.
Though the Confederation existed before her arrival, it was fragile, a web held together by Cheng I's force of personality. The captains of the red, black, white, blue, and yellow fleets were strong, ambitious men, accustomed to ruling their own waters. They obeyed Cheng I, but obedience was different from loyalty. Cheng I Sao understood this instantly. She began attending councils, initially as a silent observer, later as a participant. The first time she spoke, several captains stiffened in outrage. Opo Tai, the towering commander of the Black Flag Fleet, scoffed. "We came to hear Cheng I's orders, not the voice of a woman." Cheng I opened his mouth to respond, but she raised a hand. "When a child throws a stone," she said coolly, "the water ripples only a moment. But when a mountain falls, the river carves a new course." The room fell quiet. Opo Tai frowned. "And who is the mountain in your story, madam?" "You," she said simply. "You and every captain here. You are mountains, but mountains can crush each other if they fall in the wrong direction." Cheng I smiled slowly. The captains exchanged uneasy glances. She continued, "My husband can lead you into battle, but if this alliance is to survive for generations, you need more than battles. You need agreements, laws, trust." She proposed a system: a shared treasury, set percentages of plunder, defined territories, mutual defense obligations, rotating councils, penalties for betrayal. It was radical, it was orderly, it was exactly what pirates despised. But they accepted it because Cheng I supported it, and because the system meant fewer internal wars and more profit. Little by little, respect for Cheng I Sao grew. Plunder was glorious, but it was unpredictable. So she created something far more profitable: regular income. Under her guidance, the Confederation began selling protection licenses to fishermen, salt farmers, and merchant ships. The license, bearing the red chop of the fleet, guaranteed safe passage. Entire coastal villages began sending annual tribute, rice, silver, even manpower, in exchange for being spared from raids. "Why steal from them once," she argued, "when they can pay us every season?" Even Cheng I blinked at the thought. "You would tax them like bureaucrats?" "No," she replied, "better than bureaucrats. We will be efficient." This transformed piracy into governance. By 1803, the Confederation had grown too large to drift without a home. They needed a fortress, a base to repair ships, store treasure, and gather intelligence. Cheng I Sao discovered the perfect place: Tai Son Bay in Vietnam. Hidden by jagged cliffs and labyrinthine inlets, the bay was near impossible for outsiders to approach without revealing themselves. The newly unified Vietnam, exhausted by decades of war, tolerated their presence in exchange for promises of peace. Here she built a floating city. Workshops hammered through day and night. Forges glowed like red stars. Shipwrights shaped hulls under her strict supervision. Markets flourished, filled with traders who dared to negotiate with pirates. This was no longer a band of raiders. It was an economy. By 1807, the Red Flag Confederation was at its height. Tens of thousands of men swore fealty to Cheng I.
But within the captain's councils, in the quiet rooms where strategies were shaped and wars measured, everyone knew. The person who held the confederation together was Cheng I Sao. Captains came to her with disputes. Pursers sought her approval for complicated accounting. Even Cheng I himself leaned on her judgment when considering alliances. She was the voice of stability, the architect of law, the mind that transformed chaos into empire. Yet she remained acutely aware of the fragility beneath their success. Everything, every victory, every ship, every coin was held together by a single mortal man. One storm, one battle, one unfortunate moment could break the spine of this great confederation. And in the year 1807, that moment arrived. The sea, which had given them everything, now rose to take everything back. But it did not know that among the splintered wreckage of loss, it would awaken something far more fearsome, a pirate queen. Storms were common in the South China Sea, but the storm that took Cheng I did not come like a violent beast, it came like a whisper. It rolled in from the east with a deceptively smooth curtain of mist, the sea growing strangely calm, as if holding its breath. The superstitious men of the fleet muttered that such stillness was a bad omen. Even the gulls vanished from the sky. By dusk, the winds turned sudden and vicious. Waves rose like mountains, their peaks forming white in the darkening light. Cheng's flagship disappeared into the storm before dawn. News traveled across the fleet in fragments, shouted rumors across decks, lantern signals flickering wildly in the gale, frightened sailors claiming a mast snapping clean in two. Some said a rogue wave struck without warning. Some believed Vietnamese gunboats ambushed them. Some insisted rival captains plotted an assassination. No one knew. No one saw him die. The sea simply swallowed him whole. By the time the winds died, the water lay eerily still. It reflected the sky like a polished blade. But where Cheng's great ship had stood, there was nothing. No hull, no wreckage, no bodies. Just absence. A dozen captains scrambled their junks in desperate search, dragging grappling hooks across the waves, shouting his name into the silent mist. But the sea returned only echoes. When word finally reached Taisan Bay, it arrived not like a scream, but like a breathless confession. Cheng I is gone. Cheng I Sao's world narrowed to a single moment, a single heartbeat of stillness. She did not faint, she did not cry, she did not rage. She listened. Inside her, something ancient and razor-sharp snapped awake. Not grief, not yet. Instinct. She knew immediately the danger that now surrounded her. A confederation built on power respected only one law. Her husband's death was not simply a personal loss, it was a political catastrophe. Tens of thousands of pirates, 5 massive fleets, countless rivalries held together only by the gravity of one man's leadership, now orbiting a sudden void. They would turn on each other, or worse, they would turn on her. And she was a woman in a world where a woman on deck was considered bad luck. She did not have the luxury of mourning. Even before the search vessels returned, men began whispering. Captains exchanged looks heavy with calculation. Old grudges resurfaced. Ambitious officers straightened their backs, imagining themselves wearing Cheng I's mantle. The Black Flag fleet, under the towering, ruthless Opo Tai, hovered with dangerous intent. His men watched the Red Flag decks like wolves scenting blood. Cheng I Sao stepped onto the quarterdeck with the calm of a woman who saw everything, feared nothing. Her loyal guard, men she had personally vetted, closed ranks around her, hands on hilts. A lieutenant approached hesitantly. "Mistress, the Council of Captains is demanding a meeting." "Of course they are," she replied. "A kingdom without a king invites vultures." Her eyes drifted toward the docks, but she already knew who she needed. There was only one man capable of commanding the loyalty of the red flag sailors, a man Cheng I had raised from a captured fisher boy into a brilliant warrior, Cheng Pao. He was young, but he carried the respect of battle-scarred men. And he had the one quality more valuable than any weapon, unquestionable loyalty. Not to her body, but to her mind. She summoned him. He arrived breathless, soaked from searching the sea, grief carved into the angles of his face. "Mistress, I could not find him." Cheng I Sao touched his arm. "You searched as he taught you to. That is enough." He bowed his head, but she lifted his chin. "Cheng Pao," she said quietly, "if the fleets fracture now, all we built will become ash on the water. I need you beside me, not as a boy raised by Cheng I, but as the man he trusted most." He stared at her, breath caught. "You would make me my sword," she finished, "and my shield." It was not yet a union, not yet a promise, but in that moment a bond was forged, stronger than marriage, stronger than blood. It was the alliance that would reshape the South China Sea.
By nightfall, the council convened. 36 captains gathered on a massive war junk, torches casting long, violent shadows across the deck. They stood like predators, circling each other with their hands close to their weapons. Cheng I Sao entered last. She walked with unhurried, regal grace, the silk of her tunic whispering like the calm before a storm. Cheng Pao followed at her side, armed and silent. Every captain turned to look. Some scoffed openly, some sneered, some watched with a calculating glint. Opo Tai stepped forward, a mountain of a man, voice booming. "This council is not for women." She met his gaze without blinking. "Then it is fortunate I am not here as a woman." Murmurs rippled. Even Opo Tai hesitated. "I am here," she continued, "as the rightful keeper of Cheng I's legacy." And, more importantly, she let her eyes sweep across the deck, as the only one who understands the full map of alliances, debts, tributes, and treaties that keep this confederation alive. She unfurled a scroll, one no captain knew existed, a ledger of their entire empire. "You all know the sea," she said, "but I know the land. I know which villages pay tribute, which magistrates we bribe, which merchants owe us silver. If you kill me, you kill the spine of this empire." Silence. Then she gave them her final strike. "Cheng I built this confederation with his hands. I built it with my mind. If you trust only swords, then trust Cheng Pao. He will command the fleet." She placed her hand lightly on his shoulder, a public acknowledgement, a declaration. "And I will govern, as he intended." For a long moment, the council held its breath. Finally, Opo Tai grunted, "If the red flag fleet stands behind her, then so will I." One by one, the captains bowed, not to a widow, not to a bargaining piece, but to a ruler, a queen. When the council ended, Cheng Pao walked beside her in silence. "You controlled them," he said quietly, almost reverently. "No," she corrected. "I gave them what they feared losing the most, profit." "And now," he asked, "what are we?" Cheng I Sao looked out over the dark water, the torches of 1,000 pirate ships flickering like fallen stars. "Now," she said softly, "we rule." The sea had taken her husband, but in doing so, it had awakened something far more dangerous. The Pirate Queen had been born. The morning after Cheng I Sao secured her throne, the Red Flag Confederation held its breath. Every captain, every sailor, every boy who scrubbed the decks waited to see whether the new order would survive the week or collapse into bloody mutiny. Power won in the council was not enough. She needed something stronger than fear, stronger even than charisma. She needed law. Not the emperor's law, paper decrees useless on the water. Not pirate custom, chaos dressed as tradition.
She needed a code that reshaped thousands of outlaws into a single, unstoppable organism, a dragon made of men. The moment came sooner than expected. 3 days after her rise, a Tonka boy arrived in a trembling sampan, pale with terror. He was pulled aboard the flagship, shivering from fear rather than cold. Cheng I Sao faced him gently. "Speak." His lips quivered. The Golden Carp, my queen, a licensed village boat. Scar Wuzong took its catch. Then he burned the boat with the crew still inside. A hush fell over the deck. Even hardened pirates felt a chill. The Golden Carp bore the red flag seal, a symbol of protection purchased with precious tribute. If that promise meant nothing, then the entire system collapsed. She dismissed the boy with food and silver and turned to Chang Pao. "Bring me Scar Wuzong," she said, "alive." Chang Pao's jaw tightened. He will resist, then break his pride, but keep him breathing. Scar Wuzong returned from his raid drunk on stolen liquor, boasting loudly on the deck of the Sea Serpent. He did not see the shadows gliding across the water. Chang Pao's assault junks rowing without torches, oars wrapped in cloth to mute the sound. By the time Scar Wuzong realized what was happening, grappling hooks were biting into his hull. Pirates loyal to Cheng I Sao swarmed aboard, armed not with screams, but with silence. Wuzong was dragged from his cabin, cursing. When he saw Chang Pao, his bluster faltered. "You can't touch me, the black flag." Chang Pao struck him hard enough to make his knees buckle. "You broke the Queen's law," he said. "But she has no—" Chang Pao hit him again. "She does now." 2 days later, Tai Son Bay transformed into something never seen in pirate history, a floating courthouse. Hundreds of junks formed a colossal ring around the flagship. Every deck, every mast, every yardarm was crowded with pirates who came not for plunder, but for judgment. Torches flickered, casting golden reflections across the water like molten metal. Scar Wuzong was hauled to the center of the main deck, bound and bleeding. His crew stood behind him, their faces white. Cheng I Sao emerged onto the raised platform at the stern. She wore no jewelry, no silks, only a dark blue commander's coat and a sword across her knees. Beside her stood Chang Pao, and to her left, the chief purser Li Wei holding a great ledger. When she spoke, her voice carried across the sea. Scar Wuzong is accused of betraying the Red Flag's promise of protection. He stole tribute. He murdered under my seal. He weakened our empire. Wuzong spat blood. "You were just a brothel woman. Pirates don't take orders from—" She did not move. Her silence was deadlier than any blow. Li Wei stepped forward, unrolling a scroll. The Golden Carp paid tribute last week. Their license, number 742, was logged, stamped, and recorded. He read the boy's testimony, the value of the weekly catch, the projected income lost to the Confederation, the cost of a destroyed license route. Every word was a blade cutting deeper. "And the villagers?" Cheng I Sao asked softly. A frail fisherman and his grandson stepped onto the deck, trembling. The old man fell to his knees, sobbing. "Great Queen, they burned my sons alive." The quiet cry of the boy cut through the air like a knife. Wuzong's bravado shattered. It was just a fishing boat." Cheng I Sao finally rose. "A fishing boat under our protection is more valuable than 100 stolen ships. We govern the sea because they trust us. You broke that trust." She turned to the crowd. "Without law, we are nothing but beasts. With law, we are an empire." Then she turned to Wuzong's first mate, Gao, a scarred veteran who stood frozen. "You served under him. You benefited from his crime." She held out a blade. "You will carry out the sentence." Gao stared, horrified. "My queen, He was my captain, and now he is your burden." Gao's hand trembled as he took the sword. Wu Zong's eyes widened with terror. "No, no, you can't, Gao!" One swift, brutal strike. The head rolled. Silence thundered across the bay. Cheng I Sao did not flinch. "Let all who sail under the red flag remember," she said, her voice as cold as steel. "We are strong, not because we fear death, but because we fear breaking the order that binds us." The next morning, she summoned all scribes and pursers to the flagship. For 3 days and nights, she dictated a new law, a code that would transform the Confederation from a mass of brawlers into a disciplined armada. Article 1, the Common Treasury. All plunder to be registered, valued, and distributed by share. Theft from this treasury meant execution. Article 2, absolute obedience. Disobedience to superior orders meant death. Article 3, protection of licensed villages. Anyone harming protected civilians faced whipping for first offense, execution for the second. Article 4, treatment of captives. Female captives could be taken as wives, but with formal obligations. Rape meant execution. Unwanted captives were to be released unharmed. Article 5, desertion. Deserters to be mutilated and displayed, repeat offenders executed. Every law was brutal. Every law was clear. Every law was equal. When the code was read aloud to the fleet, men listened with wide eyes and thudding hearts. For the first time in their lives, they knew exactly where they stood. It was terrifying. It was liberating. The code was not ink on paper. It was fire in the blood of the Confederation. When a thief was caught hiding silver, his head rolled before noon. When a man raised a hand against a hostage,
Cheng I Sao stood on the prow of the flagship, gazing across her floating empire. Rows of disciplined ships, sails crisp, crews organized, morning drills echoing like drums of war. Beside her, Cheng Pao asked, "Do they fear you or respect you?" "Both," she answered, "and that is why they obey." A breeze lifted the red banners overhead. The Dragon's Code had done something unprecedented. It had turned the world's most feared pirates into the world's most disciplined navy. And this navy now served one ruler, not a king, not a warlord, but a woman forged by hardship, sharpened by loss, and crowned by sheer will. The pirate queen was no longer merely surviving. She was building a nation. The Dragon's Code had reshaped the Confederation, but it was on the open sea, against the greatest empire in Asia, that Cheng I Sao's new order would reveal its true power. Within a year of her rule, the South China Sea changed in a way no emperor, no merchant, no admiral could have imagined. It became hers. Dawn rolled across the Pearl River Delta like a sheet of molten gold. Fishing boats slipped along the water, their nets heavy with the night's catch. Merchant ships, lumbering giants from Canton, prepared to sail for Southeast Asia, Europe, and beyond. But on this morning, they found something unexpected. Red sails. Dozens, then hundreds. The entire river mouth was sealed by the floating shadow of the Confederation. Cheng I Sao stood on the prow of her flagship, Vengeance of the Deep, the morning wind tangling her hair, her profile lit by the rising sun. "Raise the banners," she commanded. Red flags snapped open, bright, blood-colored, unmistakable. A fisherman's voice cracked in fear from a nearby sampan. "The red flag fleet, the queen, she's here herself." This was not a raid, not a warning. It was a declaration of sovereignty. Behind her, Chang Pao descended the steps from the quarterdeck, carrying a spyglass. 3 merchant junks attempting to flee south, he reported. She nodded. "Let Chen Li intercept. No cannon fire. We do this cleanly." Moments later,
The swift raiding boats of Chen Li's squadron exploded from the hidden mangroves, slicing through the water like fangs. Their oars were silent, wrapped in cloth. The merchant ships never had a chance. Within minutes, they were surrounded, boarded, and forced to present their documents. One held a red flag license. It was waved through. The other two did not. Their cargo was inventoried with meticulous precision: silks, porcelain, dried ginger, sandalwood. Crews unharmed, ships released. But their silver? Claimed by the Queen's treasury. Not a drop of unnecessary blood spilled. This was piracy transformed into governance. By the second week, rumors blazed through the trade houses of Canton. The rivers are closed. No ship leaves without paying her. Even the British fear her now. The price of rice doubled, then tripled. Salt caravans stalled. Foreign traders fumed behind their barred warehouses. The Hong merchants sent desperate messages to the viceroy. And every official, banker, and merchant whispered the same name with trembling lips: Cheng I Sao. The Qing Dynasty's first response was predictable: send ships, lots of them. A grand fleet sailed south, massive deep-draft war junks, their hulls reinforced, cannons polished, banners embroidered with imperial dragons. Admiral Li Chang, a veteran with 20 years of service, commanded them. Break the blockade, crush the pirates. But Cheng I Sao was waiting. She stood beside Chang Pao at the command table, tracing the coastline with her fingers. "He will expect a frontal engagement," she murmured. "So we will not give him one." Chang Pao grinned. "You want to dance with him? I want him to think he's winning." When the Imperial fleet appeared on the horizon, thousands of pirates watched in awe. The warships were enormous, floating fortresses dwarfing the agile pirate junks. Chang Pao made the first move. "Retreat," he shouted. The order rippled through the fleet like lightning. Red sails swung away, formations dissolved, ships scattered in apparent panic. On the deck of the Imperial flagship, Admiral Li Chang laughed. "They flee. Drive them into the channel." His ships pursued eagerly, straight into the narrow straits of Tiger's Mouth. What he did not know was that the strait had treacherous tides and hidden shoals that only the Tonka and pirates knew intimately. The first Imperial giant slammed into a sandbar. The second scrapped against a jagged reef. The third collided into the first. Confusion erupted. The admiral shouted, "Reform the line, pull back." But it was too late. From the northern fog, O Po Tai's black fleet surged forward. From the southern passage, the white fleet appeared. And from behind the rocks, Chang Pao's fleeing ships wheeled around, cannons loaded and ready. Cheng I Sao raised her arm. Now. The sky cracked with the roar of 100 cannons. The Imperial vanguard disintegrated. Flames leapt into the morning sky. Pirates swarmed the drifting wrecks like sharks in a feeding frenzy. The Admiral's flagship tried to escape, but found itself encircled. Admiral Li Chang fought bravely, but he fell at the hand of Chang Pao himself, blade meeting blade above a deck slick with seawater and blood. When the battle ended, the sea was littered with burning ships and broken banners, and the Red Flag fleet sailed away, towing captured Imperial warships like trophies. Across China, a whisper: "The Emperor's navy has fallen." Tai San Bay transformed, not into a hideout, into a kingdom. Cheng I Sao walked through the heart of her floating city like an empress inspecting her palace. Men hammered planks onto current hulls. Sparks flew from forges shaping iron. Captured king cannons were mounted onto pirate decks. Merchants from Macau, Malacca, Fujian, and Siam lined the shore, selling spices, wine, foreign pistols, embroidered silks, even exotic birds. A Portuguese trader bowed deeply when he saw her. "Rainha do Mar," he whispered, "Queen of the Sea." Children played between barrels of powder. Women cooked rice aboard wide-decked junks. For the first time in generations, pirate families lived without fear. The Confederation was not merely surviving, it was thriving. In her cabin, Cheng I Sao met Auntie Plum, the tiny, wrinkled Tonka woman whose eyes missed nothing. "The new admiral arrives next week," Auntie Plum rasped. "He hates the sea. He wishes to impress the emperor." Cheng I Sao smiled. Ambition makes men predictable. She set a perfect trap for him too, and like all the others, he fell. After each victory, after each convoy captured, after each governor bribed and each admiral frustrated, Cheng I Sao stood alone at the stern of her flagship and watched the horizon. The South China Sea was quiet beneath her. Ships obeyed her laws, villages paid her tribute. She controlled the most vital artery of Asian trade. Chang Pao joined her one evening, the sky turning blood red behind them. "You have no equal," he said softly. "No," she replied, her eyes sharp, "but I have enemies. The emperor will send more."
"He will," she agreed. "And when he realizes he cannot defeat me, he will do the only thing left." Chang Pao frowned. "What is that?" "He will negotiate." A breeze lifted the red banners above her head. She had defeated the navy. She had choked a port city. She had built a kingdom on the waves. But the greatest victory of her life was still ahead, a triumph not won with swords or cannons, but with strategy that would humble an empire. The Red Flag Confederation stood at the height of its power. Admirals had fallen, rivers had been strangled, merchants groveled, governors wept behind silk curtains. The emperor's navy, once the pride of the South, now whispered her name with humiliation. Yet Cheng I Sao understood something none of her captains perceived. No empire collapses in a single battle, but every empire fractures when its treasury runs dry. And Canton was running dry. In the governor's mansion in Guangdong, Viceroy Bailing paced beneath the heavy embroidered map of the empire, sweat beading along his temples despite the winter breeze. Messengers arrived every hour, each bearing worse news. "The Pearl River remains blocked, Excellency. The British merchants threaten to leave. Rice prices have tripled. The Hong Guild begs for intervention. The Emperor demands results." The Viceroy slammed his fist on the lacquered table. "She is not a pirate. She is a plague." But plague or not, he could not kill her. He had already tried. Admirals had died. Officers defected. Coastal towns surrendered before a single shot was fired. At last, after months of humiliation, Bailing proposed a strategy so absurd that the imperial court erupted in disbelief. "We must negotiate." The emperor's ministers protested. Negotiate? With criminals? With a woman? With pirates who mock the dragon throne? But the emperor's treasury was bleeding silver, and silver, not pride, sustained a dynasty. Reluctantly, the order was given. Offer amnesty. End this war at any cost. One humid morning, a solitary junk flying a white flag approached Taisan Bay. Pirate scouts intercepted it instantly, dragging aboard a trembling bureaucrat whose silk shoes were far too clean for the deck he now stood on. He was escorted, pale and shaking, into the Queen's cabin. Cheng I Sao sat at her low table, brush in hand, calmly reviewing ledgers. She did not rise for the envoy. She did not need to.
The man kowtowed so deeply, his forehead struck the floor. Most revered Madam Cheng, His Excellency, the Viceroy, extends an offer. She lifted a hand. Speak plainly. The envoy swallowed hard. A full amnesty for you and your entire confederation. All crimes forgiven, all wealth retained. Any captains who wish may join the Imperial Navy with rank and salary. The Emperor seeks peace. Silence filled the cabin. Then gently, she closed her ledger. Finally, she whispered, they begin to think. The bureaucrat blinked, confused. My lady, she said, you may go. Tell your master I will come. He stumbled backward in shock. You will negotiate in person? She smiled. Did he expect me to kneel from afar? The parley was arranged at a fortified outpost near Canton, close enough for the viceroy to feel protected, close enough to the water for the pirates to feel safe. The day she arrived, the city fell into stunned silence. Hundreds lined the riverbank, officials, merchants, curious townsfolk, straining to see the woman whose name had choked their trade routes for years. Red banners fluttered as her flagship anchored. Chong Pao disembarked behind her, armored, solemn, hand on his sword. Cheng I Sao wore no jewels, no ornaments, only a simple dark robe, the color of storm clouds, a queen who did not need a crown. When she stepped into the viceroy's hall, every official stiffened. She did not bow. Bai Ling, red-faced and sweating, forced a strained smile. Madame Cheng, you honor us. I know, she replied. Her tone was not arrogant. It was factual. The hall cleared except for the viceroy, his senior advisors, Cheng I Sao, Chong Pao, and two silent guards. Incense curled lazily between them like a serpent. Bai Ling began with honeyed words. The emperor is merciful, your talents undeniable. The sea will be safer with you. Enough, she said softly. I did not come for praise, I came for terms. The viceroy stiffened at the interruption, but the look in her eyes, cold, calculating, ancient, silenced him. Speak then, he said tightly. She placed 4 demands on the table, her voice steady as stone. First, a universal pardon for every pirate under my command, from the greatest captain to the lowest cabin boy. No exceptions. The advisors murmured in alarm. Second, we keep our wealth. All silver, all ships we choose, all property. What we earned, we keep. The viceroy's eye twitched. Third, my chief captains will receive official military commissions, imperial rank, imperial pay. They will protect your coasts better than your own navy ever could. Even Chong Pao turned slightly at this. He had not known she would negotiate rank for him. Fourth, she leaned forward, voice dropping. I retire. I live where I choose. The government does not interfere. Ever. Her words echoed like thunder in the silent chamber. Bai Ling sputtered. This is outrageous. She did not blink. Is it? Your rivers are closed, your navy destroyed, your merchants starving, your emperor impatient, and your treasury empty. She folded her hands neatly in her lap. I offer you peace. The alternative is starvation. The viceroy's face drained of color. The room smelled of incense and panic. After hours of tense debate, whispered arguments, the scratching of brushes on paper, messengers running to and fro the inner court, Bai Ling returned. His expression was defeated but resigned. The emperor accepts. She inclined her head once, a gesture not of gratitude but acknowledgement, a queen confirming a treaty between equals. For the pirates, surrender did not look like defeat. It looked like triumph. In April 1810, the Red Flag Confederation sailed toward Canton in a ceremonial procession. 226 ships, over 17,000 pirates, 1,300 cannons, the largest naval force ever assembled in the region. They came not as prisoners, but as a state returning the keys of the sea. Crowds on the shore gasped as the armada approached like a moving island. Cheng I Sao stood at the bow of her flagship, the wind catching her hair, her face calm. On the docks, the viceroy waited with an imperial decree. Chong Pao stepped forward first, surrendering a ceremonial saber. Then the captains, then the crews. But when Cheng I Sao approached, she held nothing in her hands. The viceroy hesitated. "Madame Cheng, your weapon?" She lifted her empty palms. "My weapon was never steel." The viceroy bowed, deeper than required. Then, before all assembled, he handed her the imperial scroll bearing her full pardon. Cheng I Sao accepted it with the serene dignity of a ruler acknowledging her rightful title.
The sea fell silent. The greatest pirate confederation in history had not been crushed. It had negotiated itself into immortality. And its queen walked away untouched, undefeated, and unimaginably wealthy. The day Cheng I Sao surrendered her fleet, the world expected her story to end. Empires believed she would shrink into obscurity. Merchants hoped she would fade like a dying storm. Officials imagined she would vanish into marriage and silence. But the pirate queen had never belonged to the world's expectations. The sea had shaped her, but land did not weaken her. It refined her. The moment she stepped off her flagship and onto solid ground, she began constructing a new life, not from the waves, but from the ashes of an empire she had forced to kneel. In the early weeks after the surrender, Cheng I Sao did not retreat into hiding. She remained near Canton, watching, calculating, learning how the Qing bureaucracy breathed, slowly, heavily, with corruption between every exhale. She lived quietly in a rented house by the river, its garden filled with bamboo and the lingering smell of salt from the estuary. But the quiet was deceptive. Every morning at dawn, she received coded reports from former pirates who now worked as merchants, fishermen, traders, and legitimate men. Every evening, she reviewed scrolls, ledgers, whispers, ensuring that no magistrate dared break the viceroy's promise of amnesty. And they dared not. Once, a minor official arrested 3 former pirates to bolster his reputation. He paraded them through the streets, bragging about restoring imperial dignity. By nightfall, Cheng I Sao knew. By dawn, the magistrate received 2 visitors. Li Wei, her former purser, now dressed like a refined accountant, and a thick ledger containing the magistrate's own hidden debts, bribes, and unreported taxes. The official released the men before sunrise. No one questioned his sudden change of heart. From that day on, the local government treated Cheng I Sao with the wary respect usually reserved for high-ranking nobles or dangerous spirits. She was retired, yes, but she was not harmless. Meanwhile, Chang Pao, her closest ally, lover, and partner, began his strange new life as an officer of the very empire he once fought. The Qing Navy welcomed him with uneasy awe. He arrived not as a defeated pirate, but as a man whose reputation preceded him like a shadow. Officers whispered about how he had sunk imperial warships, outrun the emperor's fastest scouts, and slain Admiral Li Chang in single combat. Now he wore the colors of the empire. His first assignment was almost poetic: hunt the pirates who refused to surrender. He knew their hideouts, he knew their tactics, he knew their pride, and above all, he knew that no one disobeyed Cheng I Sao's strategic vision and survived. His campaigns were swift and merciless. Within months, the remaining rogue bands vanished from the coast. The governor praised him, the emperor rewarded him, the people feared him. But at night, when he returned to the quiet riverside house, he removed the imperial armor with relief and laid his head beside hers. "Did you ever think we would live like this?" he asked once. Cheng I Sao smiled faintly, lighting a single oil lamp. "No, but I always intended to." Their union was formalized soon after, the second marriage for Cheng I Sao, but the first built not on survival or strategy alone, but on companionship forged in fire and war. The ceremony was private: a handful of trusted friends, offerings of incense, a modest table of the foods they had once eaten aboard the flagship. When she placed her hand in his, the world briefly felt safe. Soon after, they welcomed a child, a son named Zheng Yusheng. Born of prosperity, the name meant, destined for continuity. Cheng I Sao held him on her lap and watched the river flow. Her arms, once accustomed to holding weapons, now held a sleeping infant, a life untouched by violence or hunger. She vowed to give him a future with no trace of her past. He would never learn strategy on a brothel floor. He would never fear storms from a sinking sampan. He would never fight for silver with a blade. He would be educated, respected, safe. And, perhaps for the first time in her life, Cheng I Sao allowed hope to sink roots inside her. But peace is fragile, even for the greatest of queens. In 1822, death came quietly for Cheng Pao. There was no battle, no storm, only an illness that began with a fever and ended with his breath slipping away like the tide. For the second time in her life, Cheng I Sao became a widow. But unlike the first time, no captains circled her like wolves, no throne trembled, no council plotted her fall. She did not collapse, she did not scream. She sat beside his body through the night, her hand resting over his heart, her face illuminated by a single candle's flame. At dawn, she stood. Her son needed her. Her fortune needed guarding. Her life, rebuilt with such precision, needed direction. Grief, she knew, could be endured. She had survived worse. But this time she faced the future alone. Not as a pirate, not as a queen,
but as a woman who had finally earned the right to choose her path, and she chose it with the same clarity she had always wielded. She left Canton behind and moved to Macau, the Portuguese enclave where East met West in a storm of commerce, corruption, and opportunity. Macau suited her. It was chaotic, multilingual, fragrant with spices and tobacco, filled with sailors who gambled their wages and merchants who hid fortunes. Most of all, it was neutral, beyond the easy reach of imperial politics. Using the wealth she had protected through amnesty, Cheng I Sao invested shrewdly. Property along the docks, warehouses for rented storage, shares in merchant ventures, and eventually a gambling house that would become her new throne room. Her establishment was unlike any other. It was clean, quiet, efficient. Games were fair because fairness attracted high wagers. Disputes were settled swiftly because order protected profits. Thieves vanished because loyalty, not mercy, kept her empire intact. Men entered drunk on hope. They left sober with respect. Locals soon whispered a new name, Ma Cheng, Cheng of Macau. The pirate queen had become the casino empress. As the years passed, Cheng I Sao grew into her role as a matriarch. She taught her son the classics, not combat. She invested in land, boats, trade routes, not battles. She hosted merchants from Canton, sailors from Europe, gamblers from every port. Her house became a quiet sanctuary near the church of St. Anthony, lanterns glowing softly at night, sea breeze carrying the scent of jasmine through its courtyard. She rarely spoke of her past. Sometimes, on winter nights, she would stand at the balcony overlooking the harbor, watching Portuguese ships sail like pale ghosts across the moonlit sea. A servant once asked, "Madame, do you miss the ocean?" She smiled, but her eyes drifted far, far away. She said, "The ocean is still mine. I just no longer need to command it." Macau's nights had a rhythm of their own. Lanterns flickered along narrow streets. Church bells chimed over the salt, warm breeze. Sailors poured into taverns where Cantonese, Portuguese, Malay, and English voices tangled like nets.
In this restless little colony, far from the roar of imperial courts and far from the storm-slashed South China Sea, lived a woman whose very name had once sent officials into a panic and merchants into prayer. She now walked the cobblestone streets unseen by most, a stately figure in dark silk, her hair streaked with silver, her posture straight as a mast. Time had not diminished her presence, it had crystallized it. After Chong Pao's death, Cheng I Sao did what she had always done when the world tried to push her toward despair. She built. She expanded her gambling house into one of Macau's most profitable establishments. She bought property quietly, intelligently, waterfront shops, spice warehouses, even shares in foreign-run gambling dens. She cultivated relationships with Portuguese administrators, Chinese merchants, and ship captains who sought her advice more than her silver. But her most devoted energy went to her son, Zhang Yusang. She hired tutors from Guangzhou and priests from the Macau mission to teach him mathematics, classical texts, maritime trade, Portuguese etiquette, and the delicate art of negotiation. He learned diplomacy at her knee, reading her expressions as she heard reports from informants. He learned restraint from her silence. He learned ambition from her survival. One evening, while reviewing his lessons by lantern light, he asked, "Mother, were you truly a pirate?"
Cheng I Sao paused, considering the many truths and the many lies she could offer. Finally, she said, "I was many things the world could not name. But what matters is this. Everything I did so you would not have to." The boy nodded, absorbing this without fully understanding. One day he would. Her home became a sanctuary of quiet power. Visitors, merchants, retired captains, even minor officials, entered with lowered voices and left with a sense of having stood before something far larger than the elegant room suggested. She kept her living quarters simple. Scrolls containing maps of old coastlines, a lacquered box filled with relics of the Confederation, an altar for Chong Pao, and a small wooden model of the Vengeance crafted by one of her old shipwrights. At night, she lit a single lamp and read reports, not of pirates now, but of markets, prices, ship arrivals, and political shifts. Her mind remained sharp as ever. Her network, now a web of merchants, sailors, dock workers, and gamblers, was one of the most sophisticated intelligence systems in Macau, and she used it not to conquer, but to secure a tranquil life for her family. As the years passed, legends about her spread like tributaries from a river, flowing through taverns, marketplaces, and ports across Asia. But legends changed their subjects. Some called her a witch who commanded storms. Some claimed she was the reincarnation of Mazu, the sea goddess. Others whispered she had the emperor's secret blessing. Foreign sailors spoke of a lady dragon who once ruled the Chinese coast. Opera troupes dramatized her battles with embroidered costumes and clashing cymbals. Fishermen told their sons that she could still call the Tonka spirits with a single whistle. None of these stories bothered her. She knew the truth. She was mortal, but her will was not. Occasionally, Qing officials visiting Macau would hear her presence and stiffen with unease. Instinct. Some even came to meet her, disguised as scholars or traders, curious to see if the tales were true. They found a dignified older woman with an unreadable expression and eyes that saw through titles, armor, and bureaucracy. One former admiral, retired after failing to defeat her decades earlier, visited her house under the pretense of seeking business advice. When she welcomed him with tea, he broke into a bitter laugh. He said, "I chased you for years, lost ships, lost men, lost rank, and here you sit, peaceful, respected, wealthy. How did you do it?" Cheng I Sao sipped her tea. "I knew when to fight and when to stop," she replied. He nodded. It was, he realized, the wisdom his empire had lacked. In 1844, the year she turned roughly 69, Cheng I Sao felt the first true fatigue settle into her bones. It came not from illness, but from fulfillment. One autumn night, she stepped onto her balcony overlooking the harbor. Below, the lamps of Macau flickered like a constellation fallen onto earth. Portuguese ships bobbed on the tide. Voices from a nearby tavern floated into the air. Portuguese fados, Cantonese opera lines, Malay sailor songs. Her son, now a respected merchant, had left earlier that evening after bringing her roasted chestnuts and the latest shipping reports. She had placed a hand on his cheek, marveling at the man he had become. "You walk a better path than mine," she told him. "You cleared it for me," he said quietly. As he left, she stood for a long while watching his figure disappear into the lantern-lit street. A soft breeze rose from the ocean, warm, familiar, almost affectionate. It carried the smell of salt, the sound of distant waves, the memory of sails snapping in the wind. She closed her eyes. For a moment, she was again the girl on a sampan, the courtesan in a floating brothel, the strategist beside a warlord, the queen on the high deck of a red-sailed empire. Her entire life in one breath. Cheng I Sao died quietly that night, in her room, the lantern still glowing softly beside her. No swords, no storms, no betrayals. just peace. Her family buried her privately, without a grand tomb or public ceremony. No monument marks her grave. No emperor wrote her epitaph. No nation claimed her legacy. But legends do not need stone to survive. Her legacy lived in every coast that still whispered her name, every opera that dramatized her battles, every historian that marveled at her accomplishments, every pirate myth that attempted to match her, every trading route she once controlled, every lawless man she taught to obey, and every woman who heard her story and realized power had no gender. Cheng I Sao did what no pirate in the world had ever done. She ruled. She negotiated with an empire. She retired with wealth and honor. She died in her bed, and she became eternal. The sea eventually forgets the names of its men, but it remembers its queens. And the South China Sea, endlessly restless, endlessly wild, still carries her legend on every tide.